It seems like a common theme throughout time is that humans have devised various belief systems or ideologies, and in response, other humans have created critiques to those ideas. Various methods have been tried to push back on these thoughts. Sometimes this involves outright banning the dissemination or even discussion of those ideas. Sometimes it involves criminalizing the folks who hold those beliefs, or worse. Tonight, we're talking about censorship, book bans, and teaching and learning hate. If you've got thoughts, we want to hear them. So give us a call, 984-789-4787. This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
All right. What is up, folks? We are back once again. It's right. It's another Sunday, and we're here hanging out 7 p.m. Central Time on the wonderful Skeptic Haven channel. Let's talk. Give us some calls. I'm Secular Rarity, and joining me is the wonderful woman that I always love to hear from because she's always got good thoughts. Stephanie Helms, what the heck is up with you?
Oh, not too much. Just hanging out. Beautiful Cape Elizabeth, the Portland Ship Channel behind me, and sort of hanging out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are you out on the water? You've been out sailing lately and whatnot?
Oh no, it's rather cold. It's 36 degrees here.
Yeah. So. Okay. So we had like 1 week of snow and ice here in Tennessee, and now that that's gone, I just kind of assume that the rest of winter has gone with it because it's always generally mild for us. But I forget you're up there. You're up there up north, and
we've got a ways to go before we can make adjustments.
Let's hope that groundhog sees the shadow, right? Like, isn't that right? If the groundhog sees the shadow, then the spring's coming, or is it
something like that? I don't know. Hard to know.
Super accurate system, never been wrong. But anyway, we have a pretty interesting topic today. Something I think both of us really enjoy talking about and come at from a couple of different perspectives. I'm always a big fan of education and figuring out ways to combat bad ideas and combat bad methods for combating bad ideas. We don't always think about that, but give us kind of an overview. This was something that you were really excited to talk about. You were like, hey, I think this is a really important topic for us. So yeah, book bans, censorship, teaching and learning and hate. What the heck is all this? What's been going on in the United States?
Well, we've seen an awful lot of effort at the local level to regulate books and libraries, for example. That's never a good sign. 2 months after the leader of a certain Central European country in the second third of the 20th century got into power, they were burning books in the streets of Berlin. And if they weren't burning the books, they were definitely going into libraries and checking out the contents of the libraries, because, of course, they did not want any anything deleterious to the program of the government at the time. Germany at the time was probably, if not one of the most literate and educated nations on the European continent. So the trashing of its literary traditions going back ages was a particularly disturbing, I don't know, what can you say, prelude of things to come. A famous German poet, whose name, of course, isn't famous enough for me to remember, literally said, where they burn books, they will burn people. So in the context of this sort of thing taking root in various places in the United States, I think it's important to understand the value of literacy, the value of education, what is education, and why it's important to a modern society. If you start losing literacy, if you start losing the kinds of values that the invention of the printing press brought, first they were biblical values, right? I mean, the very first printed book was the Gutenberg Bible. First, they were religious values. The Reformation, particularly among the English Puritans, made everyone conscious of the necessity to read the Bible for themselves. That was a key tenet of particularly Church of England.
Yeah.
Everybody had to get literate. And the original settlers of particularly New England took that with them to the New World, because that was their method of devotion. So the first focus of education in the United States, in Massachusetts, which was where the very first public schools started in the 1630s in Massachusetts, were focused on that sort of training. But what's the consequence? I mean, the New England, the New England states, the settlements in New England had a literacy rate among males of 70% in the 16 and 1700s.
That's pretty impressive.
England, 40%.
Wow.
France, 29%. So those people were really, they were keen on making sure that their children were educated, both boys and girls, at least through an elementary school, read and write and arithmetic thing.
Right. Some basic foundations to build on. So what has shifted? What is the great calls from the side that wants to enact these book bans? Because I know in Tennessee, for instance, one of the groups that has really been making a stir and actually achieving some of these goals of getting various books taken out of libraries is like Moms for Liberty is kind of a good example of a group that's going for this. What are they saying? What is their reasoning for doing this? It seems a complete shift from where the country kind of started.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's pretty disturbing. We've got. I think that particularly these groups, the Christian groups, the groups with a Christian focus, would like to go back to that basic read and write and arithmetic and never mind the science.
I wonder why.
Because it's challenging. Mm-hmm. And see, it's sort of a flip, because you start with biblical literacy, right? And then it doesn't end there, because once you can read the Bible, you can read philosophy. And the training back in the day was very much focused on classics, the trivium and quadrivium once you got into higher education and that sort of thing. So you were expanding beyond just matters of faith. And I think that a number of these organizations would like to bring it back down. Horace Mann, the guy who instituted the first statewide public school system in Massachusetts, again, he was a Secretary of State and a legislator, introduced a bill for state-funded education, right? Like, it was mandatory education had been in place, right? Mandatory public education had been in place. But Horace Mann took it like, in order to have an effective workforce and be competitive in the world, we need to educate everyone. Right. So his focus was on the needs of well, a capitalist economy, a manufacturing capitalist economy. That's like, you're going to need to have people who can read the instructions to run this thing or do this thing. And so education became a broader thing. Well, I think that the Moms for Liberty people want to collapse the liberal arts and focus on classical training at the expense of science, at the expense of lots of stuff. They're focus on the family. Well, which family? They're looking to focus on the families that look like them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And believe like them. And so it's a great way of enforcing a kind of social cohesion that benefits that cohort at everyone else's expense. And that falls right in line, I think, with the overall program of preserving a heretofore majority's power as the demographics in the states shift, and as people become more tolerant of varied sexualities, gender identities, gender roles that don't fit in that particular outlook. And of course, there's all sorts of arguments you can have as to, well, is that biblical? Sure. Well, that's not scriptural.
Sure.
We can have that argument all over the place, but that's counting angels on the heads of pins.
Right.
And, so it's a pernicious movement, and what it will do, and what it seems like the trends are doing, it will really damage the standing of the United States, which historically, because, at least in part, of the commitment to good education, good foundations of education, and we talk about some fairness a little bit later as to how that was actually applied, that yielded institutions of higher learning that until now have really attracted foreign students, which has built the country. If you look at the number, the United States had more Nobel laureates than any other nation on earth, and most of them were immigrants.
Yeah. Weird how that worked out, and we got all these people not wanting to let people in. You touched on some of the issues that the folks seeming to press about banning books and censoring, things in schools and so forth. You touched on some of those topics, and I want to go a little bit further into that and just kind of flesh out some of those specific ideas that these individuals seem to be focused on. But before I do, of course, I want to remind everybody about the fact that we are here. We've got open lines. We want to hear from you. 984-789-4787. If you have thoughts on book bans, if you have thoughts, maybe some of these groups, maybe this has happened in your area, or of somebody that has been affected by this, give us a call, folks. We want to hear, hey, you know what? It's possible that one of our wonderful viewers right now actually thinks banning books is good. Well, good news is you will get top slot if you call in. So 984-789-4787. Stephanie, what are some of these focuses that these groups seem to have right now? Or is there anything in particular? Do they just not want any books, or are there specific books talking about things they don't like? I mean, what are they focusing on?
it seems like all the many news stories that I've seen have been the things that they find skeevy are things that specifically focus on sexualizing children, right?
Okay.
Okay. Which is to say, exposing children to non-straight heterosexual couples and stuff.
Oh,
narratives that are narratives that portray a heterogeneous culture. And it's not just sexuality. It's the focus on the myth of critical race theory being taught in elementary schools and stuff like this. The notion that there is a burden to bear in telling the truth of what happened and what continues to happen in a society that for 1600, 1619, 1719, 1819, 1919, you could say 1919 if you count Jim Crow, almost 350 years of first enslavement and then dispossession for 12% of the population and growing, and in some areas far more than that. So education is a double-edged sword. If you separate the privileged class from the less privileged class and conduct their educations in a different way, you'll have the privileged class, particularly when it's a I own y'all matter, being taught that owning other people is okay. So it's arenas of privilege perpetuate bad ideas.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'm somebody who has been, I don't know, lucky, fortunate, depending on your viewpoints here, but many of my close family members have been, heavily involved in public education for a very long time. And so growing up through public education, I got to see a little bit of a different side of it, as well as being, just a regular student in it. Because there would be times, where, again, various family members, would have to be involved in meetings with, school board presidents or, director of schools, principals from other schools, yada, 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 right? And so that gives you a slightly different side of it, one that the vast majority of, folks in America, I think just as well as across the board, don't really understand the work that goes into education on the back end. So I have always grown up with this deep love and value for education. And one so that I think is, should be even across the board as much as possible, because I really do believe that, good education is the best equalizer out there, right? No matter where we come from, no matter, what we believe, how much is in our bank account, wherever we start, getting that good solid foundation for, how to think, right? For how to get to good conclusions is so deeply important. And I get so frustrated when I see folks really, really pushing against that. And I guess I guess part of my question is, has this ever worked throughout history? Do we at least, do those of us on this side of it, Stephanie, at least have something hopeful to hold on to, in the sense that we have a good track record of seeing folks trying to ban education or ban books or whatever? Do we see them failing a lot throughout history? Is that at least true? We can be hopeful about that.
I don't know. It seems like the most successful societies, or I would argue that the societies that value learning and have valued the liberal arts, trivium and quadrivium, have made social progress. Generally, I think it's why those nations have attracted people from other nations to their shores to become part of the thing that makes the economy tick, the things that make the society tick. And one of the great developments, anyway, at least in theory, in the United States, with a burgeoning immigrant population at various times, was a public education put these people together and created what we used to call the melting pot. It never really was a melting pot. It was more like a salad bowl where you get all kinds of different things mixed up in there, and you get a little bit of French dressing, a little bit of Greek olives, and this, that, and the other thing. Everybody maintaining a particular identity, but holding to and learning about what we used to call the secular religion, which of the United States, the foundational documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the story of George Washington and his cherry tree and axe and all that stuff, that blended a diversity of people and cultures into a conversation that we were able to have. It's not always, and it certainly wasn't always pretty. It was never a situation where you're never going to have strife. Right. And probably the gaping hole in that is black-white struggles. That, segregation was the law until 1954 in Brand versus Board. And federal troops had to force Little Rock, Arkansas, to let an elementary school kid in. And that wasn't long ago. That was a year after I was born. Yeah. And some of us remember that. And some of us remember, well, this is a Southern problem. Well, no, it wasn't. Because even in the North, this de facto segregation was just as pernicious as the jury segregation in the South. Yeah. and took almost a similar amount of effort. I grew up in Boston. I remember the busing riots, and they were riots. People in Dorchester Dorchester and South Boston did not want to have people from Roxbury in their schools. And the difference in quality between schools was substantial. Jonathan Kozol wrote a book about it called Death at an Early Age, and it was based on what was happening in the Boston school system at the time, and it was a scandalous book. Came out in 1963, 4, something like that. But, and this is where we get into the teaching of hate, This is where you can, education can teach wonderful things, or it can teach terrible things.
Yeah.
And I think that the on balance, I think that Moms for Liberty would say, teaching that people come in all shapes and sizes and ways they love one another. They would think that teaching that or letting that be shown would be a terrible thing, because it's anathema to their belief system, because
right.
that's not what the good Lord, that ain't how the good Lord planned it.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
It does seem to me sometimes, because I always, even for the folks, I think many of us here, rightly so, have that feeling in the back of our mind of saying, like, they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. We don't need to be super charitable with what they're saying. I still want to try and be charitable. I still want to try and take people as honest interlocutors in this space. And unfortunately,
I'm just shifting.
Oh, good. No, good. I was just making sure that I was just making sure I wasn't seeing something, because I was like, well, Stephanie may have just disappeared from view.
I have wizardry.
Good. Perfect.
I have wizardry stuff.
You saw it here, folks. Magic, real.
It is real.
No, but I want to be somebody who says, okay, you guys tell me this is the reason that you're doing it, right? You tell me the reason that you're banning certain books from middle school libraries is because the information that they are presenting is somehow inappropriate, right? Could be inappropriate in a handful of different ways, but just blanket, this is wrong. And then we go look at some of what these books are. We go look at some of what these topics are being discussed. And you come to find out that, for instance, one of the books that consistently finds itself on this list is that story about that little girl, that little 5-year-old who had to be walked in by the National Guard. For some reason, the biography of Ruby Bridges comes up a lot on these banned book lists. And I really, really struggle as to what is the charitable reason that you would want a book like that banned. And I come up empty a lot of times. It just feels as if they just don't like that story, which seems to be like the epitome of like people overcoming their differences and trying to come together, right? How do you justify banning that?
I certainly couldn't justify banning that. And I think that in a lot of situations you'll find people you making some other excuse that tries to obscure, but in this particular case is very, very difficult to obscure, the out and out racism and bigotry that's going on. And it can sound all very well and good, and it's like, it's almost like we gonna have to debate this again.
Yeah.
Are we really gonna have to reignite and resolve that conversation again after 60 years? are we really going to do that? And there are so many places in the world right now where that exact thing is going on. We are going to have the conversation about a woman's right to choose all over again.
Yeah.
After 50 years, we are going to have a conversation about voting rights after 60 years. And I think that we need to recall how long those conversations went on prior to the adoption of something that people not a lot younger than me grew up with not even having to think about.
Yeah, I definitely, I know you often talk about MLK's letter from a Birmingham jail. Definitely powerful stuff.
I'm sure that's on the band list.
Oh, I would. Yeah, I honestly would. Yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised. But
the dream speech with black children and white children coming together and all of that. Well, that's obviously that's hagiography. It's worthwhile remembering that Dr. King was literally the Gallup polling of favorability. I think it was Gallup. It might have been Harris polls, but I think it was a Gallup poll. Correct me if I'm wrong. I could find it. But in 1966, he had an unfavorable rating.
Say definitely
of 67% of the nation viewed the man as unfavorably, and 40% of that were very unfavorable.
Yeah, definitely after his comments on Vietnam.
Well, no, this was before them.
Even before
this
them.
Was 66. This was 1966. And 2 years later, the man was assassinated. It's like, he's a Christ-like figure nowadays that proves that we've overcome racism. Well, that's a very substantial misreading of the guy's actual life.
Yeah, it's not an accurate telling of history there. But the reason I brought that up is because I very much value that sentiment about the moderate, the individual who, in this topic, for instance, stands up and sees various groups, various individuals pushing for books to be banned, pushing for certain ideologies to not be talked about, or just certain people to not be talked about. And I get frustrated oftentimes by the folks that are saying, oh, well, it's not really that big of a deal. Oh, well, I mean, it'll go away. They're riled up right now, but they'll get a couple of books out of, the libraries and then they'll be fine. Is this a view that you think is well-founded, or do you think this will keep sticking around with us for a little bit? Is this censorship and book ban, kind of wave that we've seen going on? Has it come and gone, or do you think this is kind of the beginnings to something worse?
Well, of course, it all depends. It depends on how it's handled and how we deal with it, whether we're going to be open about discussing it or not, or whether we're going to have those quiet conversations. Because after all, these are good people; they can be convinced. And maybe if we sit down in a room with, I don't know. Moms for Liberty or the Heritage Foundation, and one of these, a representative who is promulgating these ideas and funding the efforts to make this happen on the ground, because these things don't happen in a vacuum. They have to convince people to put the law in place.
Right.
quite recently, this is really kind of weird. Quite recently, one of these groups, or at least a conservative activist in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, the home of William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folk. Absolutely legendary, brilliant man.
Right.
Grew up in Great Barrington. The library that some parent called the police to inspect the contents of the library was named after Du Bois.
Wow.
And, that just blows your mind. Because here's a guy, a black man growing up in the North, who relied on access to education to develop his intellect to the point where he could write and speak the brilliant words that he did. And here's someone coming in because, we can't have CRT. We can't have availability to things outside of a particular, I hate the word worldview, but I guess people have them, a particular frame of reference.
Sure.
That really, I think, seeks to maintain hegemony over society at large. And you're getting to your question, is it a phase? Well, there were phases in, banned in Boston used to be, this is immoral. This is immorality. Henry Miller, we can't have Henry Miller being sold in Boston. It was actually, a selling point. My book got banned in Boston. It must be hot.
Yeah. You're going to need to pick up the next
want
copy.
To read this, right? There were times when we went through the era of the decency laws, the Hollywood decency laws. You can do this, but you can't do that. And it was a phase that did seem to, everything opened up in mid 60s through the stretching into, it seemed like a good 30, 40 year stretch of openness. But the people who enjoyed those book bans, they didn't go away. Their culture didn't go away. Right. Their commitment to, this is a horrible thing we're seeing happening to our country. And you see that repeated over and over and over. They're taking our country.
Right.
And that's what they're tremendously scared about. Because nobody, you got to probe a little bit and find out who the "our" is when you say our country.
Yeah. And
you got to be honest about that,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, what you just said there is the two kind of sides I always love to present in this moment. And I think you did a great job of kind of encapsulating both of them right there, which is, I think there is a little hope to be found in the history, in knowing that human societies all throughout the world, all throughout time have faced these challenges, and we're still here today, right? So it seems like, at the very least that we've been able to come through. But even with that hope, right? Even with that, good outcome that we're kind of looking forward towards and always trying to get to, we absolutely cannot lose sight of the fact or gloss over the pain and suffering and outright loss of human life that took place during those periods of time where these ideologies of banning things we don't like left and right, of actively attempting to make sure the next generation is not educated on the problems of the past that led us here today. The suffering that was caused, right? I mean, you've brought up, 1930s Germany. The suffering that was caused from this ideology. Sure, sure, the Third Reich didn't last. Okay, that's awesome. But think of the atrocities that happened in the meantime. And again, I don't want to paint this whole this whole discussion as, we've lost and there's just nothing we can do. And, I want people to still be positive because I think that spurs us to fight harder. But I don't want people to be complacent and think that because we have made so much progress, guys, look, hey, we did it. Jim Crow's not here anymore. It's not the law in the South of the United States. Fantastic. We're done, right? No. Hell no, not even close, because 30 years, 40 years to achieve the progress and 1 second to pull it all back. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Yeah, and the issue there is, you think about 1933 to 1945. What's that? That's like 12 years.
And it ain't that long. But
long enough. That's like 3 presidential terms, right?
Uh-huh.
Things can go bad, very quickly, unless people see see the warning signs. And when we start losing, when we start having to relitigate these issues and sit down in debate rooms, and you see people, you see these debates going on where we are literally talking about suffrage again with some people that from the left, we're going to talk to somebody's basically would pass as a conservative ages ago, and from the right, we're going to talk to this lunatic who wants to take away women's suffrage, let alone abortion rights. I mean, you've already seen, a slippage in what was a recognized right into the past. And what I think I'm agreeing with you when I say you can't. I think the mistake that we made was forgetting how hard won those rights were, and that they aren't vindicated by simply being, because not everybody believes in them. Quite simply, not everybody believes that individual rights extend to decisions over their own body, and that redounds in so many areas of the kinds of choices that people are afforded with their physicians and families, and the kinds of things that what kind of freedoms they have. If we don't make the connection between the hard work that was done, the 40-foot drift was shoveled away, and now all we need to do is keep the sidewalks clear, and we haven't been keeping the sidewalks clear.
Yeah. Do you think in part there's, because I think you brought up a really, really good point there about, so many, especially, and I don't really want to paint, younger individuals as, naive or ignorant necessarily, right? There are many individuals out there. I think I literally just read some article the other day, some kid from Devin over in the UK just scored like a 160 on an IQ test. So there are obviously people that are younger than both of us that are very
sure.
well educated and intelligent, you know. That being said, it does seem to be a trend over the years. And I don't even mean like just a 5-year thing. I mean like hundreds of years, you know. We're so far away now from the concept of 13 separate but kind of connected colonies that literally had to fight on their home soil against you know, the British, the largest military. We're so far away from the revolution in 1776 now that many of the big issues that were being talked about and fought about, they just don't latch on to us, right? Because we're just so far away from them. Do you think that one of the reasons a handful of these groups are attacking education so strongly and so fervently is because it helps to kind of push that gap further, faster? Like if we don't teach about the civil rights movement in the United States in the 60s, they won't know that we're taking away their civil rights, right? Does that make sense? Do you kind of see where I'm coming from on that?
I'm sorry, I got distracted there. Could you say
That's
that
okay.
again?
Just basically, I guess basically it seems like a lot of these folks, you know, banning books and stuff are taking that idea of if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. But they're thinking that that's a playbook, not a warning. They're saying like, hey, if we don't teach about all the difficulties that it took to get us where half of the population actually has the right to make decisions about their bodies, if we don't teach you about that struggle, it's a lot easier to take that right away. Do you feel like that rings true?
I do. I do think that rings true. I think that the heavy lifting, it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be a constant reminder that these things are maintained by people, and that there needs to be an honest reckoning with people who think they're misguided in some way, whether they think they're misguided by virtue of something that was, we want to talk about the long reach of history, a book that was written 3,000 years ago, in part anyway. It should be governing for a book that was written 3,000 years ago for the governance of a small tribe of tens of thousands of people.
Yeah.
In a confined strip of land between a river that goes into a landlocked sea and the Mediterranean, that codex of law should be governing and obtaining in a world of 8 billion.
Yeah.
That is so interconnected that you can sit in Tennessee and I can sit in Maine, and people from around the world can watch us have this conversation.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like the greatest thing. It's why there was provision for amending the Constitution, albeit the way they made us do it is a little complex, which is why we only have 27 amendments to the goddamn thing. And the first 10 were passed within 5 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's not a great big huge thing. But we ought to be cognizant of the fact that why was that system developed? You know, why out of what philosophical milieu and what concepts of politics and polity where did these ideas come from? And they came from John Locke, and they came from David Hume, and just this huge panoply of thinkers that were part of the Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, and you know, in reaction to, like, when my sixth great grandfather came to New England in 1637, there hadn't been an English Revolution.
Right.
You know, the Puritans were the Puritans came here because the Church of England couldn't stand them. They kicked them out. I always say that my ancestors are the worst buggers on the planet. The English are terrible. I mean, they took over Ireland. They started out with Ireland. They actually started out with Scotland, then took over Ireland, and then had 2/3 of the world under their thumb. And we were the sons of guns they kicked out.
Right.
Because we were too ornery, you know. But we are the fruits of, you know, the people that were writing those documents.
Sure.
Were within a couple of generations of a king getting his head cut off, and a Republican period, and the restoration of monarchy. So, you know, all of these things were rather fresh in their minds, and they would say, well, you don't want to do that again. How do we separate these things? And they had you know, these philosophical treatises on government. You know, it's amazing how much those guys did. Now, they also did the work on the ground to enforce what they thought at the time were the common rights of Englishmen. Right, and they thought that the Brits were abrogating those common rights, and therefore they had to stand up and assert those rights. But we have to do that too. Right. Every generation has to do that too, and it's not. And we have the benefit of a couple of hundred, you know, two and a half centuries of that history, and of developing our own systems. To say, well, no, you're taking away our right. These are our rights here, and we are not going to. We have fought for those, and we are not going to see them be taken away on the basis of a cadre of people that seem to want to be ruled by biblical law.
Yeah, and I want to go to things we can do to kind of push back this tide of censorship and so forth. Because there's a bunch of organizations out there. I always think of, like, you know, American Atheists, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United. There's so many wonderful organizations. And I want to get to that. But before we do, I think one really crucial aspect, and I'm glad you've brought this up, and I want to highlight this because I think it is, you know, particularly pervasive and harmful. There does seem to be mixed in with all of this. Again, we're trying to be a little charitable, folks. I know some of y'all are probably thinking, Elliot, why are you trying to be charitable with some of these people? Because I think, I truly believe that the arguments are so poor that the best version of them are still obviously flawed and will fail. So the best argument I see coming a lot of times is how, you know, we're protecting children, and we're keeping them safe, and we're making the world a better place, you know, for people. But then I see this hate. Then I see this deep hatred for people. Sometimes it's trans people. That seems to be a huge focus. Sometimes it's black people. Sometimes it's women. Sometimes it's poor people. It goes across the board in a lot of different ways. And I guess one thing that I'm wondering is, and this is where I'll love to pick your brain on this. Why is there so much hate seemingly involved with this push? Why does it seem to be the case that we find the folks that are wanting to ban books, that are wanting to censor these ideas in public schools and so forth? Why are they so seemingly hateful? Maybe that poisons the well a little, but it's our show, so we can do that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Is there a reason that this is the case? Is it just like a coincidence? Am I just maybe overblowing that fact?
Well, we're still very tribal. We're still very we're Homo sapiens. We are trapped in our biology. Biology is part of history too, and they also want to misteach biology in the schools, and a whole bunch of accepted tenets of biology are of course also things that they like to rail against. The theories of answers in Genesis. Did you hear me? Yeah, okay, I guess I'm safe. The theories of answers in Genesis can't be taught in schools because it's not science, and Pennsylvania court found that it's not science. And there's a number of people that say, God damn it, yes, it is. It is science. And it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what science is, what it can accomplish as opposed to simple Christian belief.
Yeah.
You would going with the Bible as your field guide, you'd be hard pressed to discover oil.
Yeah.
Or explain why it was there.
Yeah.
Or you'd make up a story that said, well, God hid these things and he had these, he dug these holes and poured the oil in just so that we would have it. He didn't tell us where they were, but we can figure it out. And how do we do that? Dowsing rods? I mean, it sounds pretty Joseph Smith-esque, right? If you instead of looking for golden plates, you're looking for black gold. But it doesn't work that way,
right?
And science doesn't work that way. The people that are mobilizing channels on the internet to spread this message would have been incapable of developing this technology, because science can't progress when it is mandated. That somebody comes along and says there are things that go around other planets in the sky. Lock him up for the rest of his life. Put him under house arrest.
Right.
And I think that it's fear. I think that it's fundamentally fear. That this is what has kept our tribe so sustained and nourished spiritually over centuries, and it has led us to have the material benefits of the world, and we do our tithe and all of this stuff. And this is where this stuff is mostly coming from. Mostly, not exclusively, but mostly, it's coming from people with very fundamentalist views. And of course, on the other side, they didn't think, well, why should we even care about that? Because we are not of this earth. We are born to heaven or hell.
Yeah. I think you're right on both sides of it there. Yeah.
Not give a fuck about a whole bunch of stuff.
Right. I mean, in part, you've got this ideology that does really incentivize folks to actively stop caring about making this life a good one for people. That's something I think you can see across all major religions. There's this great focus on kind of this idea a lot of times that like this world is just crappy, you know, like this existence just is on a lower tier than this other cool, super cool place. You know, sometimes we call it heaven, sometimes we call it Jannah, sometimes we call it Nirvana, but it's kind of all the same concept. Like there's this better existence that like you can get to eventually, but this is always just kind of going to be crap. So you have that on one side, and then on the other side, you've got exactly what you were saying. This fear response, which I, you know, again in part, and this is me trying to be charitable. You guys are gonna, you know, you guys are gonna see me try to do that as much as I can on this stuff. In part, I understand it, right? I mean, it seems so human, you know, that you've been
Sure.
doing something, you know, a certain way for a while. It's worked out. And somebody comes along and says, well, gosh, man, we got to change that crap. It makes sense to me why humans would kind of come into ourselves. We kind of close ranks in those moments. But you mentioned something, and I think this might be a good shift to start talking about, you know, what methods could we use? What can we do to push back on some of this garbage that I think you and I, you know, very much disagree with, of censorship and book banning and teaching of hate and so forth. Because you talked about how like there was this really big thing in the US. It started way back with like the Scopes trial. And then like, you know, it's like Kitzmiller versus Dover. Like, so we've had this thing back and forth where it seems like, Stephanie, it kind of seems like we banned creationism talking points and stuff. It kind of seems like we said, hey, no, you
Yeah.
can't do that. And maybe we're doing the bad thing that we're accusing the other side of. Are we hypocritical? Is there some difference between these situations? Why is that situation not the same as a group like Moms for Liberty saying we can't have a book that has two 12-year-old boys who like each other in a romantic way? What's the difference between those two sides there?
I think that the difference is the willingness of our side to not restrict the teaching of cultural traditions within the context of a religious faith, and our commitment to not impose those religious traditions on persons of other faiths.
Yeah.
Or no faith at all.
I think that's a pretty important difference.
So if you're, I mean, I do recall prayer in schools. When I was in the 3rd grade, my Jewish homeroom teacher had to recite the Lord's Prayer and have us pray along. Now, that seems to me to be an imposition on both the teacher, you know. Well, you could say, well, if you don't want to do it, you go find a job somewhere else.
Sure.
But that's not, that's not how a multicultural and nation can function, because that's automatically othering people, and that's the biggest thing. And part of the commitment that we should have as a civil society from my perspective, is a commitment to honor the traditions and being of people not ourselves or of our tradition or like ourselves. So how do you know that there are these other traditions? How do you know that when you get to be 13, if you're not attracted to the gender you're supposed to be attracted to, that it's okay, you're still a human being, and you're and you're not going to be told, and you're not going to be trapped in a closet of a mental and sometimes physical closet. You're not going to have people running after you to punish you and keep you out of society. So it's a question of acceptance. It's like, and the other side, on the other hand, would have all people who wish access to the broader reaches of society to follow their instruction manual. Precisely. Which comes as it's a bit of a problem, because you can't find unanimity in the Christian faith.
Yeah, weird how.
You can't find and that's why we have a First Amendment, literally, because there were Puritans in Massachusetts, Anglicans in Virginia, Quakers in Pennsylvania, and a whole admixture of Catholics in Maryland, Jews in Rhode Island, or actually Jews in Rhode Island, not Providence Plantations. That's right. The first synagogue in the United States was the Truro Synagogue on the corner of Truro and whatever the hell it was in Spring Street.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
In Newport. And George Washington visited. It's like, hey, this is really cool. Anyway, we have a First Amendment because it was that kind of a polyglot nation, and they couldn't possibly get along. That's why it says Congress shall make no law. They were talking about the federal, we didn't want it. We couldn't have a state religion. Couldn't. I mean, we'd already seen what a state religion was. Or a lot of the English colonists already had seen what a state religion was, because, King Charles III is who happened to be the first, King Charles, was it Charles II? King Charles I was king when my sixth great grandfather showed up over here.
Wow.
and so, they knew what an establishmentarian religious regime looked like. And it just wasn't feasible. You couldn't possibly do it with so much religious diversity, and that's what a lot of these folks, I don't think, understand. I think that some of the challenges to some of these to some of these measures come from other people of faith who say, hey, wait a minute, that's good for you.
Right.
It ain't good for me.
Right. Right. I think one of the greatest things I saw after the Dobbs v. Jackson decision from the Supreme Court, which allowed for it didn't say you can't have abortions. That's not what the Supreme Court ruling said. What the Supreme Court ruling basically said was, we kick it back to the states, and the states now can just decide whatever they want willy-nilly, which creates this patchwork of legislation, which oddly enough was the exact situation that led to Roe versus Wade in the first place. Whatever. Yeah, weird how that turned out. So anyway,
Well,
But
that's exactly
that's
that
what
was
they
the case. That
want.
was the case in that was the case when I was growing up.
Right, and that's what they
a
wanted.
girl in Lexington High School was like, oh, where is she? Well, she's not in class today. It's like, oh, she went to New York.
Right, she just
Everybody
went over
knew
the
what
border.
that meant.
Right, exactly. But you touched on something else that I think was a really good point, especially when, because I do hear this criticism sometimes leveled, towards our side of this discussion, where it's like, well, you want to ban stuff too. You don't want me to talk about my religion. You won't let me teach young earth creationism in schools. And I often am a little confused by that criticism, because I actually don't have a problem in the sense of, you have the right to teach your children, that the earth was made in 7 literal days. But you don't have the right to do that in a capacity that infringes on others. And you don't have a right to do that in which you take our government's money, a government that doesn't have a religion, and push that religion, especially one in conflict with other religions. And that was why I brought up the Dobbs v. Jackson thing, because I think one of the best moments in that whole discussion was Sonia Sotomayor questioning and basically talking about, the question was something along the lines of, how is this argument about when life, begins, right? Is it at 5 weeks? Is it at conception? Is it at 30 week? Where does this happen? Sonia Sotomayor says, how is this not explicitly a religious argument? And I loved that some of the people,
of course,
it is, right. I totally agree. I think it is, right?
The Catholics on the court is like, well, I know why.
I think
right here.
I think the response from the lawyers on that, when you go read the transcript, is very paltry in my opinion. But some of the amicus briefs that were on the side of pushing against that ultimate decision that came down were from Muslim and Jewish organizations based here in the United States. And specifically, they brought up the fact that their religious beliefs and practices were being infringed upon. Were being infringed upon by really what is, at the end of the day, an evangelical Christian ideology. And so I was really glad you brought that up, because that's one of the big things we forget, especially in this country, with the letter from Danbury, right, to Thomas Jefferson. We've got one religious group actively trying to persecute another, and the religious group says, government, make this safe for all of us, make this even for all of us. And when we lose that wall, when we lose that secular wall between church and state, it doesn't just affect the non-religious. Absolutely, it affects those of us out there that take the labels of atheist or agnostic or free think or whatever, but it also affects every other religious person out there who isn't part of that niche religion, that got this law passed. And I guess it's just, do we on the atheist, skeptic, non-believing side, do we need to side with more folks that do have some religious beliefs, as long as they're interested in the same secular and science-based goals and conclusions? Do we need to join forces with some of these other groups out there, Stephanie?
I think we do. A classic example is, you can teach the Bible in school, just not in an instructional setting with teachers. You can have an after class Bible hour. Now, you can do that. You can have the Christian club or the blah blah club or whatever within certain limits, and certain jurisdictions have different. You want to rent the cafeteria for, you can go ahead and do that, right? Or you can have these organizations are totally permitted. It's not like you can't do this, but just not going to do it because it ain't science, and it ain't. It's you can go ahead and do that. What do these Christian groups get upset about? The Church of Satan would like to organize an after-school Satan club, and all of a sudden, no, you can't do that. It's like, why the hell not? I mean, of course we can, right? So then they go all mopey away. It's like, well, if they're going to let those people do it, we don't want to do it. We'll do it over here. I was like, fine. They'll do it over there too. Your choice. See, there's a matter of choice involved here. That on the one hand, you insist on this is the problem. You insist on your doctrine being the exclusive doctrine, right? And they'd push back and say, "Well, no, science is faith too." Don't you hear that frequently? Then you would get callers that call into the shows.
All the time.
Science is just a belief too. You have you have faith. You believe in evolution. It's like, no, I've read the theory and I've seen the evidence, and it seems like it's pretty explanatory, and it does a hell of a lot better job than talking snakes and donkeys. So, at least I can find a paramecium. You can't show me a talking donkey.
Right.
But it's fine. As long as people agree that we're diverse, we're culturally diverse, we're racially diverse, we're gender diverse, that's just us. That's what Homo sapiens are. That's what they've always been. And, as long as what we want to do in this society is cultivate an attitude of tolerance, so that we can learn from each other and not exclude each other and be good neighbors to each other. So we don't have a 30 years war.
Yeah.
So we don't have this kind of split. Going back to history, these people, 2 generations before, had had a sectarian war about the supposed Catholic tendencies of King Charles I. They chopped off his head. And these guys' grandparents, for Christ's sake.
So I think you're right. You're totally spot on. And I think I saw this. I don't know if this comment is necessarily directed at us or not, but I liked it, Stephanie. So I'm going to put it on the screen and read it either way. So our wonderful producer, Wes, has said, "You've lined out the problems well, which is a first step. Next, though, what are your solutions to these problems? And if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear your thoughts." So again, because I'm not positive that was for us, and I just kind of grabbed it anyway, not only are we going to answer, but I'm going to kick it out to y'all. Whether you're here in the live chat right now, hanging out with us, thank you so much, or you're checking this out on the replay later on, which we're also very thankful for you. Give us your thoughts. Like, if you have an answer to this, if you have solutions, if you've got a novel idea, please leave it in the comments below. We absolutely read through those. Even when you say mean things and make fun of my shirts, I read those too. So if you have an answer to this, we'd love to hear it, because we're always looking for some. But Stephanie, go ahead.
Somebody's going to ask what Mr. Hanky is all about.
Yeah. I was going to ask, actually. I'm going to find out before all of you.
We'll get to that later. But anyway, no, seriously, on a serious note, what are the solutions?
Yeah.
Be aware. Be aware. and don't be unwilling to discuss these issues forthrightly. You know, if you're having a flat Earth debate, why not just say, well, why?
Yeah.
You know, do you want this taught? Yes. Do you engage that discussion and see where it leads? To educate yourself as to where these traditions come from.
Yeah.
And also, far more important than that, because a lot of this back and forth stuff just goes in one ear and out the other. Be involved with your school committee. Be good if you've got kids in the public school. Be at the PTA.
Yep.
Talk to the other parents. Don't start a fight or anything, but have those conversations at that level. Have those conversations with the politicians. Put politicians in office that aren't going to be partisans for fundamentally faith-based assumptions about all of these notions of bodily autonomy, of tolerance and acceptance for LGBTQIA plus kids in school and adults. A lot of people seem to think that trans people just were born 40,
Right.
or 30, or 20.
Right.
And you know, and the age keeps ratcheting up at which awareness of gender dysphoria impacts a person's life from the point of view of somebody who doesn't know it. But every single one of us was a child once. And some of us expressed that feeling as children, and it wasn't easy to do that in 1957.
Yeah.
And that's what's changed. It's become so much easier, and the push is to make it as hard as it was then, if not harder, to be a person. And I think that the focus on trans people is simply because there are so few of us, and so few people are willing to speak for us or speak with us.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a very easy target. But
that's it. Political action is what secured these rights in the first place.
Absolutely.
Being aware of discrimination when you see it and saying, hey, that's wrong.
Yeah, and I think
like you see somebody being beaten up in the street, you know, call the cops or get involved somehow or another. Pull the miscreants apart. And, hey, cut it out. That's wrong.
Right, and support the places and the people that are doing the work, that are in the trenches day after day. That are the tip of the spear, like you like to say. I love that, because I think it's a really, really apt metaphor. The folks that are taking the brunt of this right now, across the board, are unfortunately, yes, like you just said about trans individuals worldwide. We know that statistically it is a smaller group. We know that this isn't up for debate. And because of that, I think those of us that care about these hard-fought values of freedom, those of us that care about these hard-fought values of equality for folks, right? We have to recognize that the smaller groups are the ones that will be targeted more often. They'll be targeted harder, and they'll disappear right in front of our eyes before we even realize it. And as we stand around and we say, oh, you know, they always do that. They just make a fuss, you know, they're just, oh, it's not going to be that bad. You know, we'll be okay. That complacency breeds suffering. That complacency allows for individuals that truly do have a goal of hate and harm. It allows those folks to perpetuate their ideas because we're not standing up against them. So I know I mentioned a handful of wonderful nonprofits earlier that are doing great work, like Freedom from Religion and so forth. There are a lot more, you guys. There are a bunch of them that are out there. I'm sure a good few of our people here have heard about things like the Trevor Project and a bunch of
Mermaids
other.
in the UK.
Yep. Bunch of wonderful, wonderful organizations that are out there that really are fighting this fight. And they need support. And I think that is one of the, look, I am not asking nor expecting everybody out there to start doing what you do, start compiling this wonderful data and information to just be able to just counter these, hateful, points from folks just trying to, ban LGBT people into oblivion. I don't expect that from everybody. I don't expect from everybody to hop on a show and put themselves out there, as much as you do, and I get that. Maybe that's not for everybody, but what's really, really damn easy to do, in my opinion? It's really, really easy to show up to the places that regularly are having this conversation, that regularly are fighting this fight, and tell those folks, hey, I'm here for you. And then when you find yourself in another place and others are perpetuating these terrible ideas and you don't agree with that, you don't just sit there quietly. You make it known. Hey guys, I don't agree with that. I think you're wrong there. I don't think that's the right step forward, I mean, honestly, you said it the best. Participate, folks, because it will not just stop at that small group, right? That doesn't have as many voices out there to stand up for them. It won't stop there. It will continue, because if you're not lockstep with those individuals that are actively trying to push more and more folks back into closets, if you're not in lockstep with them, they're not your allies. And they made that very, very clear time and time again. And it will continue until the entire world is in lockstep. Yeah. And I just disagree with that garbage. Please.
And if your poker buddy hosts a big game and gets everybody over there and likes to talk about taking away other people's rights and makes jokes about them and this and that and the other thing, say, listen, I love poker nights, but I'll have to find another table.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have the capacity to deny our sociability with the people who are pushing this stuff. They'll get the message there. They won't get it in a debate. But if you're not inviting them to the barbecue, they're going to get that message.
Yeah.
Alan Dershowitz, like 3 years ago, he used to be a firebrand lefty, He's still referred to as a firebrand left, and he's not. He's about three steps to the right of Attila the Hun at this point in time. But he got so pissed off that his rich pals at their summer places in Martha's Vineyard weren't inviting him to cocktail parties anymore. Went to the New York Times. The New York Times ran a big spread about Alan Dershowitz complains that he's not getting invited to cocktail parties. Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, good. Goddamn right, that's good. If you're not getting the message with anywhere else, maybe your friends are saying, "Hey, dude, you're over the edge." Like we can't do that. And vote. What happened in Ohio with the citizens in writing protection for choice into the Constitution over the objection of a veto-proof majority legislature in Ohio.
That's right.
They tried every which way to not let that occur, but it did. And if enough people realize that we've had enough, we ain't doing that.
Yeah.
good things can happen. When enough people were mobilized to see segregation as wrong. When parents like mine, whose daughter, not me, but my sister, who was 15 years older than I, went to Augusta, Georgia to work in a black settlement house in 1961. And her boyfriend at the time was also in Montgomery with the SCLC. When those northern white folks saw that their children of privilege were taking on the cause of black liberation and freedom from segregation, and saw the brutality through which it was being enforced on the TV, they changed their minds. And they changed a lot of people's minds.
Definitely. And that seems to be regular throughout history when we see these types of movements and we see these types of pushbacks. I agree.
But you got to keep your foot on the accelerator. You got to keep and the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, because these people don't go away. Right. They don't.
Right. Because it's baked into the core of a lot of the ideologies that are pushing for this stuff. And I think it's deeply important. It's deeply important that we never forget how hard it has been to get to where we are. And again, just one moment. That's all it took, you guys. That's all it took was one court case. That's all it took was one vote on a bill. And, back to Ohio, here you see a veto-proof legislator coming in and saying, you know what? We don't want to provide medical care for minors in our state for certain things. We just don't think that that's the right thing to do. Years, decades, folks, it took to get these things. And unfortunately, with just a moment, they can all go away. So I really value you, Stephanie. You always bring a lot of really great stuff, and
we've got some people to thank here, I think.
Yes, we do.
We have a few, quite a few actually.
Would you like to thank those people?
Well, I want to. I'm happy to participate, but I want to remind everybody that coming up on the 10th of February, Saturday, Women Atheists Unload will be having a call-in show just like this, and maybe they'll get calls.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. They're so much better. They're so super cool, and it's on Saturdays, so it's a good time.
It's Saturday the 10th of February. So put that on your calendar. The topic is the war against women.
Much more real than the war on Christmas, folks. I think there's actual tangible evidence.
Because there really is one, for example.
Right. And of course, folks, don't forget to check out all of the wonderful shows here on the Skeptic Haven channel. We have fantastic things like Tuesdays, Secular Soapbox. Thursdays are the Sunny Spot, and Saturdays for the Global Atheists and Women Atheists Unload. And of course, on Sunday, we've got Let's Talk. And thank you so much to those wonderful patrons. You probably just saw their names flashing by, but we're going to say them out loud because we freaking love them. They help keep the lights on, and they are such wonderful folks like Eric Ozols, Rion, Deneen Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, Phil Calderone, Amanda McLeod, and Logan Fisher. Thank you all so freaking much. And thank everybody here that was hanging out with us in the live chat. I saw it was lively the whole time. We absolutely love that. Anybody that's watching in the future, we greatly appreciate you too. One of the number one things you can do to help us out here is just like the video, just share the video, just comment below the video. We've asked a lot of really important questions tonight, folks, I think. And we want you to participate. That's the point of Skeptic Haven. We're a community, and we want everybody to give us their thoughts and let us know when we get stuff right, and even more so when we get it wrong. So tell us what you think maybe we can do here. What are some methods and some solutions to these problems where it just seems people are really actively gung-ho about taking away people's rights. So yeah, get those in the comment section below the video, and don't forget to like the video. If you haven't done that yet, what is wrong? What is, I know your computer works because you're watching us, so just click the freaking button already. Or otherwise I'm gonna have to yell like this. And I don't think anybody wants that. Nobody wants that. But we absolutely cannot go just yet, Stephanie, because we need to tell people where the heck they can find more of you. I know there are lots of places that they can. Where can people find all of the great content that you do?
Well, I have a channel. It's at SteffiCath on YouTube, and I just rant a bit about stuff here and there. Sometimes it's history, sometimes it's more discussing trans issues from the perspective of a 70-year-old lady who transitioned 26 years ago, which is rather different in these spaces in some precincts. So I've got that, and occasionally on the Transatlantic Calling Show over on the line. Most recently with Arden, I think the 28th of December, I was over there doing that. And you can catch me here and there sometimes. Maya Adkisson's Sunday, Bad Science Sunday, which is happening right about now. They're probably underway, so you should go check that out. And here and there.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I always love seeing I also want to thank producer Wes and Kat, the humanist, and Bree, who was working behind the scenes as our call screener. Not a very. Oh, look, we have a call.
We did, but I figured we were right near the end anyway, okay. So we're just gonna let that go. We're very sorry about that, but guess what? Call in earlier. This show happens at the same freaking time. It's scheduled 7 p.m. Central Time. This channel. We've been here for an hour and a half, and now you're like, well, maybe I'll call. No. I'm sorry. That was rude. That was rude, caller. I really appreciate it.
We apologize, caller. Very, very sorry.
But we will, of course, be doing this once again next Sunday. Now, 7 p.m. Central, folks, right here on the wonderful Skeptic Haven channel. Again, we have all those wonderful, great shows coming up, and a very special Women Atheists Unload February 10th. So you definitely don't want to miss that. I'm going to let Wes get the heck out of here because I'm sure he wants us to go at this point, and if I keep him any longer, he's probably going to yell at me about something. I don't like that. I hate making Wes upset. But Stephanie,
you don't want the producer aggro.
That's right. He gets angry, though. He might just be hungry. It might just be a hangry thing. We'll get him a Snickers. It'll all be fine. No, seriously. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us tonight. And again, please remember, Skeptic Haven is a community. That's what we're here for. So we want your thoughts, folks. Reach out to us. Hit us up on the Facebook and the Twitters or X or whatever the heck it's called. I don't care. But reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts and give us some ideas for some shows in the future, or guests you'd like to have on, because we're always looking for cool atheists and skeptics out there to connect with. But we'll get out of here tonight. Go be heathenous or blasphemous, or just do non-godly things, I guess. That's always a good piece of advice. So thanks so much, folks, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.